Fort Worth, Texas is a city known for rodeos at the stockyards, delicious barbecue joints, and football games at TCU Stadium. But there is more to this city than meets the eye. Although these quintessential Texan elements are integral to its identity, Fort Worth is also characterized by its diverse population. In the decades following World War II, a surge in commerce and trade between the United States and Japan prompted a significant number of Japanese families to uproot their lives and establish new roots in the U.S., many of them in the northern parts of Texas. This influx symbolized the beginning of a cultural exchange, a blending of two unique ways of life. These pioneers were faced with not just the challenge of a new language, but also adapting to a land whose customs and practices stood in stark contrast with their own. This shared experience and collective effort laid the groundwork for a broader initiative to bring Americans and Japanese people closer together through cultural exchanges in both Fort Worth and in Japan, as well as the exchange of business ideas between American and Japanese companies. Three individuals among the thousands who have played a part in this emergence of cultural exchange and understanding were Asako Cosby, Tadashi Yamagata, and his wife, Elaine Yamagata. Tadashi and Elaine's second son, Harvey Yamagata, who has served as president of the Fort Worth Japanese Society for more than 15 years and received several awards for his own work in fostering relations between Japan and America, recalls how his parents always had a mind for bringing the two countries together.
My father graduated from Kansai Gakuin University. He wanted to become a diplomat when he graduated because Japan's stance militarily at the time he graduated, that was not really a possibility. But he always wanted young people to think more internationally.
For Asako Cosby, helping her community came not from a grand picture of bringing two nations together, but rather from a desire to exert her energy into helping the people around her. Don Cosby, Asako's second son and sitting judge of the 67th District Court in Tarrant County for more than 20 years, describes his mother as a woman who poured every ounce of energy she had into her community.
If you looked at in an encyclopedia or a dictionary and you saw the word the Energizer Bunny, those two words, there would be a picture of my mom to explain what she was. She was always on the go. 6 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night. A lot of energy, but all of it devoted to others. She wasn't going to let anything get in her way. No was not in her vocabulary.
Although Tadashi, Elaine, and Asako were all driven to build a community that both assisted others and helped encourage people to broaden their own horizons, the road to being able to provide this was far from easy for any of them. Through war, poverty, and heartbreak, all three would come to play a vital role in helping foster better relationships between two vastly different nations, through community outreach both from their new homes in Fort Worth as well as in Japan.
My mother was born in Kumamoto, Japan on September the 7th, 1928. She is the youngest of three children. She lived in Kumamoto all her life and graduated from the girls' high school in 1945 and then went on to the girls' junior college and did that for about 2 years, and from there, when she got out of that, she was able to find a typing job on the American base located in the Kumamoto area.
It was during her work on the American base that she met her future husband, James Cosby, an American serviceman based in Kumamoto during the Korean conflict. But her decision to marry an American in 1952 was not well received by her family.
My mom was basically excommunicated by her own mother. Her father had died by then, but my mother had no communication with her own mother until around 1973. My mother came over to the States in 1953, so 20 years.
After their marriage, the couple returned to the United States and settled in Fort Worth, Texas, where they soon became a family of 4, with the birth of John and Dawn just a few short years later. But then, when Asako was heavily pregnant with her 3rd child, the elder Cosby left his family and filed for divorce in 1957, leaving his wife to take care of 3 children completely on her own.
And then when they married and she came over here, the limited resources of learning English did not exist. There was no English as a second language course. And so she relied heavily on the people around her. And her close contacts were a couple of her Japanese friends who were in the same boat, who spoke limited English. And so it was difficult for her. When she came over here, we have to remember, we were only 7 or 8 years past the end of the World War II. I recall seeing her several times when I would go visit her in her room, that I would catch her crying because of the struggles she had. She didn't let a lot of people see her crying. She didn't want the egg to be broken. All she knew was work. All she knew was to give it her best, to make the best of what she had.
Abandoned in a strange land with no family to rely on, Asako Cosby took on as much sewing and typing work as she could find in her battle to make ends meet. But it simply wasn't enough. Before long, a local judge and the head of juvenile services in her area approached her and convinced her that it was in the best interest of her children to send them to Lena Pope Home for Children.
During that 3 months that we were away from my mom, albeit she came to visit us every week, she did not know how to drive, but she somehow or another found either a ride for a friend or was able to get a bus from Hearst to downtown Fort Worth, and then the city bus down to the west side of Fort Worth, was able to come visit us on a weekly basis. Eventually, she then came to work at the Children's Home in roughly March of 1958.
As difficult as it must have been for Asako to see her children separated from her, the Lena Pope Home proved to be exactly the landing ground that her family needed. Just a few months after her children moved in, Lena Pope offered Asako a position working in the home, which would allow her to live on the same property as her children and see them much more often.
My mom had a heart for working with children and made some fond memories of all the children that she helped raise and participate in their lives. She often could not pronounce their names, and so everyone became just Kiddo. She would call them Kiddo, and it worked out really well for her because they knew that despite her not being able to speak their names, she was able to show her compassion for them as well as us.
Since its establishment in the 1930s, the Lena Pope Home has served as a refuge for Fort Worth's at-risk children. Through her relationship with the home, Asako was introduced to Broadway Baptist Church, which opened their doors to offer a community hub for Japanese Americans and immigrants, fostering companionship and involvement in its various organizations.
She devoted herself to the church and working in the various organizations. She served food on Wednesday night at the church, and everyone knew her. She was the secretary for 30, 40 years of the high school, middle school, Sunday school department, and she would check the roll. My mom would always call the parents when the children weren't in Sunday school, and her favorite saying was, why are your kid not in Sunday school? She did that religiously.
She was also considered the donut lady at church, Broadway Baptist Church, where she was extremely active. She was responsible for making sure that the adult who was to bring donuts for the Sunday school classes didn't forget. And if they ever forgot, they all knew the wrath of Asako Cosby. It was very shallow, meaning that it never lasted with her. But boy, when she got angry at you, you knew she was angry.
Among the organizations that Asako became involved with through the church was the Tandy Corporation. The company, parent to Radio Shack, capitalized on the mid-20th century boom in demand for Japanese electronics. Over the years, Tandy's international division drew hundreds of Japanese businessmen and engineers to Fort Worth, where they learned American business practices and ensured product quality. Working together with Fort Worth locals, this mutual learning experience enhanced careers and strengthened the two countries' ability to productively engage in business. But it wasn't just the businessmen and engineers that made Texas their home for years at a time. Often, the employees would bring their wives and children with them.
And all these Japanese families would come over to work at Radio Shack. And at Christmas and at Thanksgiving and various holidays, we'd gather together. She would find a place and celebrate with those Japanese families. And she would take them and show them where to go shopping and made them feel comfortable, made them feel at home as best she could. And she spoke the Japanese language that they loved, especially the wives, very young wives with children. It was different for them.
It was through her work helping these Japanese families settle and her relationships with people at Broadway Baptist Church that she met a couple who would also become local leaders in bridging the gap between Japanese and American people, the Yamagatas. Tadashi and Elaine Yamagata first met in the early 1940s after Tadashi returned to Japan following a Japanese conflict in China in the 1930s. Elaine, who was born in California to Japanese parents and moved to Japan at the age of 16, graduated from Kobe College, where she studied music.
Somewhere along the line, her father felt that his daughter should get married. And so her father started asking around to find out if there were any eligible men in the area. And that's when he met with my father's father, who was the minister of the church. The thing is, a lot of Japanese men were not really interested in marrying a Japanese girl that was born in the United States. But my father was, and always has been, a little more open-minded than many people and always thought internationally. And as I said, he always wanted to become a diplomat. So actually he thought, it's not a bad idea to marry someone that was born outside Japan. And so a meeting was arranged between my father and mother, and they hit it off, I suppose. And they decided that they were a good match for each other. As we know, over time, they became a perfect match for each other.
After their marriage, Tadashi Yamagata formed a transportation company in China and moved alone to Beijing, where he helped transport raw materials to Japan.
It was not uncommon for Japanese men to go seek their careers and not necessarily be with their family. That could be for months, it could be years at a time. But my mother, newly married, was very, I guess, typically American, and she did not want to be separated from her husband for any length of time. So on her own, she just picked up everything and, without being able to speak any Chinese, took a boat to China and got on a train to look for her husband.
After joining her husband in Beijing, Elaine kept house for her husband and soon in 1943 gave birth to their first son, Makoto, whose name was later changed to Mark when the family moved to America. At this time, she was also able to pick up a little of the Chinese language from the ladies who worked in their house. This skill proved vital following World War II, when the Allied forces and the Chinese government interned all Japanese individuals within their borders. After a challenging journey across China, where they frequently encountered resentment from Chinese civilians due to wartime events, they reached the POW camp.
Fortunately, it was managed by an American force. So when they were being interviewed before they got into camp, they realized that my mother was an American citizen, spoke English fluently, spoke Japanese fluently, and spoke a smattering of Chinese. So they asked her, would you please be an interpreter for us? And that was a very good thing, because that way they got to know the soldiers quite well. And they also gave us what they called officers' quarters, which I understand was a little nicer than the regular quarters for the other prisoners.
It was in this prisoner of war camp that Elaine gave birth to her second son, Hiroshi, later named Harvey. Within months of his birth in January 1946, the Japanese prisoners were allowed to return to Japan. After a strenuous journey back across China and a cramped sea voyage, the Yamagata family settled into life in Japan, with a small convenience store in Bofu, where Elaine's English proficiency attracted international customers, including foreign soldiers appreciative of a shop where their language was spoken. At this time, Elaine lived near Hiroshima, so she also worked with the Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission, assisting victims of the atomic bomb blast. Within a few years, Tadashi found work with a trading company in Kobe, Japan, that ultimately decided to send the Yamagatas to start a new office in New York City.
When my brother and I came to the United States, I was 6 and he was 8, and we spoke Japanese fluently, and the only words we knew in English, because we had to fly by ourselves, was thank you, please, cold, hot, bathroom. I think those were about the only words we knew. So when we came to the United States, we're little kids, we're going to public school, everyone's speaking this other language. So before you knew it, my brother and I had forgotten our Japanese and were just speaking fluent English. I regret that. I wish that I had never forgotten my Japanese.
Over time, Tadashi Yamagata's relationship with his employer became unstable, largely due to differences between American and Japanese business styles. This prompted the family to establish their own trading company, representing Japanese firms in New York City and aiding in the import of goods from Japan.
My father had a falling out with his main headquarters office in Japan, which I understand was not unusual. Many people who move to a foreign country under those circumstances, the head office doesn't always understand the new environment, so there'll be misunderstandings and it creates some bad feelings. So my father started importing goods from Japan. And at that time, the things that you would import from Japan would be bicycles and optics, binoculars and microscopes.
One of the Yamagata's main clients was Radio Shack, a major retailer of consumer electronics, as well as optical goods like binoculars and microscopes. The Deutschmann brothers, who owned Radio Shack at the time, proposed that he import electronics from Japan. Despite Tadashi's admitted lack of knowledge in consumer electronics, he agreed, as most Americans were unfamiliar with procuring products from Japan. Thus, A&A Trading was established, funded equally by the Deutschmanns and Yamagata's own savings. When Radio Shack was bought by Tandy Corporation in 1962, Radio Shack had 2 or 3 stores, and they were in financial difficulties. A few years later, after Radio Shack was back on solid footing, Charles Tandy bought the other half of A&A Trading to create his international division. Tandy kept both Tadashi and Elaine on, as their work up to then had proved important to opening doors to trade in consumer electronics with Japan.
And the way I hear it, he gathered all the executives at Radio Shack, and my parents were there because Radio Shack owned part of my parents. And Charles Tandy said, I want all of you to stay, I want all of you to move to Texas, and I want all of you to invest in Tandy Corporation. And most of these guys didn't believe him very much and said, I'm going to build 50 Radio Shack stores. And before you know it, we'll have 100 stores. They said, well, this guy must be from Texas. Next time we meet, bring your shovel.
Charles Tandy proved that he could put together a team that would turn his vision into reality. Capitalizing on the soon-to-explode consumer electronics industry, at its height, Radio Shack had over 7,000 stores in the U.S., Canada, Europe, and Australia. After their company became part of the Tandy Corporation, the Yamagatas relocated to Texas. There they met Asako Cosby.
My mother became very close with Elaine Yamagata, Tad Yamagata, but mostly Elaine Yamagata, who got my mother involved in Fort Worth sister cities. They traveled together to Japan. They often met at the local Japanese palace and ate. And they just, it was a great relationship between the two. And my mom had the utmost respect for the whole Yamagata family. And with what they wanted to do with Japanese people here in the Metroplex, and what they wanted to do to make sure that the Japanese culture was not a forgotten culture with people here in the Fort Worth, Dallas-Fort Worth area.
There was a celebration called the Sun and Star Festival, a one-week event hosted by Dallas and Fort Worth. And then Mayor of Fort Worth, Bob Boland, asked my mother, could you please put together all of the Japanese and Japanese Americans and friends of Japanese here in the Fort Worth area to have parades and floats and all of that. And so we had this huge parade. Perhaps we had 20, 30 floats. And when that ended, the Japanese Americans who were gathered for that event asked my parents to see if they could start an organization that could keep us together so that we could still meet and have dinners together, etc. So that's when they started the Fort Worth Japanese Society.
Whenever the Japanese Society, Fort Worth Japanese Society, would put on their Sunday dinners, my mother would make her sushi rolls, and she always made sure to make my brother, sister, and I some extras. My mother's had an incredible dislike of hospitals. And at one point she did have a triple bypass. I got a call from the hospital. They needed me to come down, but they caught my mom walking out with her IV. Her gown did not close all of the back end. They were laughing as she was pulling out her IV. And she was telling them that she needed to get to the Fort Worth Japanese Society luncheon because she had to make sushi. They didn't. They told her, no, you could not do it. They were able to get her back into the bed, but she was very, very upset and would not talk to them, would not take her medicine.
This sheer force of personality and determination to see things through also came out in Asako's dedication to the taiko drumming group established by the society.
The drums were all purchased and through some relationship that Elaine Yamagata. And my mom felt it an honor to, one, make sure that the drums were well cared for, make sure that the Yamagata Center was opened on Sunday afternoons so that the drummers could come practice. Her main thing was making sure that those large, expensive drums were well cared for, made sure that they were used properly, and made sure that the drummers themselves represented the Japanese culture as visioned by the Yamagatas and visioned by my mom and what the purpose was. And it still goes on today.
In addition to helping establish organizations like the Fort Worth Japanese Society and its many club activities, Elaine and Asako put their seemingly limitless energy to work in countless other ways. Asako, for one, was known for helping with interpretations for American Airlines and even the Tarrant County District Attorney's Office.
My mother also assisted the Tarrant County District Attorney's Office when a young Japanese college student who had been traveling the U.S. alone was sadly murdered in Fort Worth, but in the process of the investigation, they located the young girl's diary, and my mom translated the diary for the district attorney's office and helping them as they were trying to figure out what was leading up. Was there someone she had met? They were able to solve the murder. I don't know if the diary had any assistance with that, but they were able to solve the murder. And when the family came to Fort Worth to collect some of the young girls' belongings, my mother was with them when that happened.
Elaine Yamagata, while continuing to work as vice president for A&A International under Tandy Corporation, poured her energy into activities such as serving on the board of the Fort Worth Museum of Science and History, promoting the internationally acclaimed Van Cliburn competitions by establishing trials for young pianists in Japan, and helping nurture the Japanese American National Museum in Los Angeles.
My mother became very, very involved with the Japanese American National Museum in Los Angeles. They archive so many artifacts of Japanese Americans that those who are doing research often contact JANM, Japanese American National Museum, to access records in their archives. The mission of JANM is so that people won't forget that Japanese Americans were sent into prison camps called internment camps to soften the language, despite the fact that they were American citizens. The purpose of JANM is not just to remember what happened in those days. It's one, you have to remember the injustice that was shown to the Japanese Americans, and that this kind of injustice could happen at any time.
Rather than simply serving their communities at home in the States, however, Asako, Tadashi, and Elaine all were involved in promoting a positive relationship in Japan, a mission that saw major success with the formation of the Fort Worth Sister Cities and its partnership with Nagaoka, Japan, a city on the western coast of Japan that is most famous for its annual fireworks display.
It was primarily my mother and father who were able to make such a strong tie between Fort Worth's Japanese sister city, Nagaoka, and Fort Worth. And that is one of the most successful sister city programs in the international program of all the cities. My father wrote the only Japanese language book about the city of Fort Worth, and he did this so that the people of Nagaoka would be able to read about Fort Worth before they came here. And it's quite interesting. It's not very large, maybe 75 pages, but it traces the whole history of Fort Worth. We exchange about 100 Japanese students come every year from Nagaoka, and we send about 50 to 60 Fort Worth students to Japan every summer. And that's been going on for nearly 20 years. And so if you multiply 20 years by the number of those students, you can just imagine how many young Japanese and how many young Americans became very familiar with each other's culture. And in fact, the international group found Nagaoka, Fort Worth relationship so strong that they awarded my mother the Volunteer of the Year award.
Asako Cosby was also a recipient of the Sister Cities Volunteer of the Year award for her involvement, including organizing meetings between Japanese and American businessmen and helping to facilitate business relations between companies from vastly different cultures. One such company was Axio, a $2 billion grocery chain in Japan managed by the Hara family.
6 or 7 times she went back to Japan, often with the Sister City program with that, and developed an incredible relationship with the Hara family. Mr. Hara came over here and wanted to meet with the people of the Central Market grocery store here in Fort Worth. That's part of the HEB organization. And just so happens that Stephen Butt, who runs the HEB facility, Central Market in Fort Worth, was a member of Broadway Baptist. And my mom had met Stephen Butt by calling him up to request that he remind his daughter to bring donuts, or would call up and say, why your daughter not in Sunday school? But when Mr. Hara came in town and he wanted to see the grocery store and be taken through a tour of the facility, my mother called Stephen Butts and arranged for that. And it fascinated Mr. Hara. Every time he came to Fort Worth, he wanted to always go to Central Market to see what else they had lined up.
But the exchange between American and Japanese people was far from one-directional. Tadashi Yamagata had a vision for helping to ensure that the next generation of Japanese students grew into adulthood with an international mindset, and worked with his own university to bring that dream to life.
When he became very successful and had money, he built a dormitory for Kansai Gakuin University, and he made sure that when it was built that one of the things that the university had to do was house some of the foreign students in that dormitory. And in that dormitory, they all ate together. And so many of these young Japanese students got to know foreign students and learn some of their language and their cultures.
In 1985, Tadashi Yamagata retired from A&A International due to problems with his health and failing eyesight. Elaine took his place there and led the company for another decade before retiring to care for her husband full-time when his vision failed completely.
After my father retired, he was conferred the Japanese Emperor's Order of the Rising Sun. which is something the emperor does every year to a number of Japanese people who are overseas who've contributed to things that are good for Japan and the community that person lives in. And because of my father's pioneering work in the consumer electronics business, he was conferred this prestigious award. And then somewhere along the line, I think somewhere in the, early in the 2000s, my mother also was conferred by the Emperor of Japan the Order of the Rising Sun, whereas my father was recognized for his contribution for pioneering the consumer electronics industry. My mother was awarded for helping to develop the relationship between Japan and the United States. And so they were both honored for all the work that they've done.
Although Tadashi and Elaine passed away in 2003 and 2013, respectively, their influence can still be seen in both Japan and Fort Worth. Their legacy is carried forward through the work of their sons and the ongoing tributes in their memory. Among these commemorations is a bridge at the Fort Worth Japanese Gardens, dedicated to them in the spring of 2023, which stands as a testament to the impact they had in connecting the distance between two cultures.
I think it's very important for any ethnic group, especially if they're in a minority. You have to be aware of your own background and be proud of it. And if you're not proud of it, it's because you don't know enough about the background of your group. Because every group has so much to be proud of. If you want to wallow in your troubles, you won't get any place. If you want to get someplace, you have to be aware of what people have been able to accomplish.
Tadashi, Elaine, and Asako's efforts to support one another and improve relationships between Japanese and Americans through cultural exchanges touched thousands of lives.
At my mother's funeral in February of 2022, there were over 500 people at her funeral. It was absolutely shocking to my family and to the minister, who commented that he had not seen so many people in attendance. Japanese friends, a lot of church friends, a lot of civic-minded people.
Marty Leonard from the Leonard department store background gave one of the eulogies, and she had most of us in stitches because she would tell us all these stories about Asako, knowing full well that most of us knew the same stories. I would go to some events where there were many other city people, Fort Worth people, and I think, well, I'll introduce her to some people. Well, we go there and she disappears. She knows many, many more people in Fort Worth than I do because she just doesn't stop. She's this whirlwind going around meeting people all the time. My mother came to the United States in 1953, spring of 1953, when she was pregnant. She was not an American citizen. When my father abandoned us sometime in 1957, she still was not an American citizen. And interesting, what I did not know, later when she placed the children at Lena Pope and she came to work there, my mother continued, I don't know how she was able to do it, but something told me she took buses, city buses, to go to the classes. Back then you had to take classes. In 1961, my mother became an American citizen, and I didn't find that out until after her death. And I was absolutely stunned that she never talked about that. And I asked my mom before she passed if she wanted to be buried back in Japan, but she did not. She was an American, and her kids were here, and so she's buried here in Fort Worth. America is filled with the American dream. And you don't have to be the president of the United States, or you don't have to be the CEO of a major company. You could just have a nice, very happy family and have that American dream. And people should realize that that's always very possible in this country. Just think positively.
This project was made possible by a grant from the North Texas Community Foundation and members of the Fort Worth Japanese Society.